Greetings everyone, this is Rambling Collector here, and welcome back for another comic review. Now, the subject material of this particular review is going to be very interesting, as we're not going to be talking about multiple separate comics in this video. Instead, we're going to be talking about two series of Batman comics that all center around one singular character. And thus, the title of this video, the Jason Todd Spotlight. Now, for those of you who have seen my previous comic review of Doctor Doom, the Punisher, and Red Hood and the Outlaws Volume 1, you will know that I've had a fascination with at least looking more into Jason Todd and the Red Hood as a character. And just after reading both of these graphic novels, detailing the life, death, and rebirth of Jason Todd, honestly, it was a phenomenal story. And I cannot tell you how many times this particular series has been recommended to me. And I'm only glad now that I can finally put it to bed and at the very least learn more about the character that is Jason Todd, the second Robin, and now the most well-known vigilante, the Red Hood. With that, let's get started, shall we? So firstly, we have here Death in the Family by Jim Starlin, Jim Aparo, and Mike DiCarlo. Now, frankly, Death in the Family was not what I was expecting at all. Like, I knew for a fact it was going to cover the death of Jason Todd, which is by now one of the most iconic stories in the old Batman mythos, and has really stood the test of time, all things considered. But see, while I had known about Jason Todd's death, I had not known about the events leading up to his death. But the comic goes into some very good detail, showcasing Jason's character and just how he would go to meet his end at the hands of the Joker. And I will say this much. Major highlights for the first half of the story: Jason's search for answers about his real mother, having that moment of reuniting with her only for it to end in tragedy when Joker becomes involved, truly makes this story a sad turn of events, especially with Batman losing a son in the process, because by that point, Jason not only loses his mother as well as his own life by the end of this book, but Batman, for the first time, loses a son. And immediately after this, the introduction of Tim Drake as the new Robin was an interesting follow-up. Watching his investigative mind and putting together the pieces about Batman and Robin's identity, leading to him becoming the new Robin after proving himself to a reluctant Bruce Wayne, it made for a fun story, and it really gave that tinge of a hopeful ending. And as we all know, for those who have followed the comics afterwards, Tim Drake has gone on to be a successful hero by himself as the new Red Robin. But overall, the main focus of Death in the Family was, of course, the death of Jason Todd, and then the future recruitment of Tim Drake. And I will say, overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this comic book from start to finish. Especially, I love that really colorful 80s or 90s style to it. And frankly, there is some history here with Death in the Family alone. Like, the fact is that the fans voted for Jason to die in the first place. And even then, they also made an alternate page of what would have happened if Jason Todd had been voted to live. To me, that's actually a pretty cool little bit of history, and I honestly don't know if fans are still this involved in comics. Like, I'm sure you have fans who grow up to write and draw the comics, sure. But having it where you can call a number to show whether that a main character lives or dies in a comic series, I don't know if that's been done up until now, or ever again. And frankly, I'm kind of curious if you all have any other, I would say, options, or no, that's not the word, opinions, or perhaps other examples of something like this, a very deeply involved community. Let me know. I'm honestly very curious. But now, moving on from Death in the Family, we go to the big one. Under the Red Hood by Judd Winick and Doug Munka. And I apologize if I have butchered those names, but that being said, let's get started with talking about this particular graphic novel. Now, Under the Red Hood, there's a bit of funny history here. I have, until this moment, only seen the animated film of Under the Red Hood, which stars Jensen Ackles as the voice of Red Hood, which, by the way, he does a fantastic job. That man literally has the Red Hood voice for me anytime I read him in the comics, so absolutely. But I really liked how Under the Red Hood serves as a good follow-up for Death in the Family, especially if you're reading both back to back. Now, it might throw some people off kilter with the different art styles, specifically how Death in the Family has the 80s to 90s very colorful, very rough-looking hand-drawn artwork, and then you've got Under the Red Hood, which is like still very clean, but also has a rough look to it as well. Mainly because this is not a happy story. This is in fact a very brutal, gritty, and dark story, which, in a sense, winds up being a great tragedy. And, quite frankly, this whole collection, which covers the story of Jason Todd's resurrection and his return as the Red Hood, which was over nearly 600 pages worth in just the hardback. This whole collection made for a very weighty but really engaging read. Like, at one point, I was reading it for a whole night and just could not put it down for the life of me. I was really tempted to just stay up all night just to keep reading and seeing how it all ends. And like I said before, until this point, I had only ever seen the movie, and I was very surprised at some of the story points of the comic, particularly Jason's resurrection and his restoration via the Lazarus Pit, because in actuality, the movie makes it out like Jason was purely resurrected via the Lazarus Pits, but this is not in fact the case. This actually harkens back to the event known as the Infinite Crisis, where universe upon universe of DC was colliding against one another, and Jason Todd's resurrection was actually caused by the reverberations of Superboy Prime railing his fists against the universe, sending out a massive ripple effect which would cause changes in reality, and Jason Todd's resurrection was in fact one of these major changes. However, as it is shown throughout the story, though Jason would be resurrected, he would effectively be brain dead for all intents and purposes, until, finally, he was thrown into Ra's al Ghul's Lazarus Pits by Talia al Ghul, of all people. It was not Ra's al Ghul, in fact, as the movie had portrayed. It was, in fact, Talia wishing to restore Jason. And to me, it's a very interesting twist to actually see that. Because, again, I'd only ever seen the movie, so I know they probably had to cut corners a lot when it came to casting this into animation. But by God, some of these details really change up the story when you really read through the comic. And it makes for a really good change. And honestly, I might consider doing a book versus movie video just between Under the Red Hood because of this. Who knows? Might be something to look out for in the future. But more so than this, more than just Jason Todd's characterization here of his return to Gotham, his grudge against Bruce Wayne, and especially the Joker for killing him, but more so watching Batman, reading as he has to come to terms with the fact that not only had Jason come back to life, but had chosen a more violent form of vigilantism, was particularly engaging, especially leaving the reader to ponder who truly had the right idea in their philosophies of dealing with criminals. Now, what I mean by this is that while Batman does do the right thing by putting criminals in jail and trying to follow the form of the law to the best way that he can, at the end of the day, it does not work too well when you have high security prisoners such as Joker, Poison Ivy, Mr. Freeze, Clayface, Bane, all of whom keep escaping from Arkham Asylum and still causing massive amounts of damage and death every time they escape. But Batman, choosing to stick to his code of no killing, while an admirable thing, has honestly led to far more deaths than can possibly be imagined. Whereas Red Hood does not have that problem. He is not afraid to kill any major criminal that he sees as a major threat. And honestly, it really is a fun little juggling situation of whether you choose who you believe is in the right. Do you believe that Batman sticking to his code of honor is a good thing? Or do you think that Red Hood himself has the right idea, putting down the most dangerous of criminals in order to clean up the street in that particular fashion, in a more permanent ideal? Now, I will say I think this series ended on a cliffhanger, which I am not happy about, and I would really like to see if there was a conclusion to this, or at least a way that this wrapped up. Let me know if there is that in the comments down below, and I will immediately grab my hands on it as soon as I can just to find out how this whole thing ended. I need to know. But, regardless, I will say this much. The story, definitely engaging. I crave for more, and I'd like to think that after reading through this and Death in the Family, this really gives you a great look into the character of Jason Todd. How he functions, how he returned, everything else, his relationship, which is very complicated by the way, with Batman. This whole father-son dynamic, or essentially when you look at it, a father looking at a rogue son, going off and doing his own thing. Which, funny enough, under the Red Hood, for one more thing, it actually does bring a very neat connection to Batman Hush, which, as you all know if you've seen my review of that particular comic, I was not altogether impressed with. However, after reading through Under the Red Hood, it does shine a new light on Batman Hush in that sense, because for that moment, it was not Clayface acting. It was, in fact, Jason Todd returning in the flesh to see Batman in person, especially after finding out that he had found a new Robin so soon after his death. And to me, that actually made for a really cool plot point, which makes me want to reread Batman Hush at some point or another. Maybe with new, fresher eyes. Who knows? But I think I've prattled on long enough about Under the Red Hood, so let's move on to the next slide. So first and foremost, I've got to talk about the artwork here, and it is phenomenally done. Hands down, Under the Red Hood and Death of the Family, if I can say one great thing about them besides the story, it is definitely the artwork. Like I said, I love how it's so bright and colorful with the 80s and 90s comic style for Death in the Family, but then when you look at Under the Red Hood and how it's so clean and polished, and yet still very rough in a lot of cases, especially around the edges, it really lends that nice diversity, I would say, when it comes to reading, because in comics, you never know which particular story you're going to read unless you're actively looking for it. And oftentimes, some of the older stories can be just as good, if not better, than some modern stories told today. And I think that is a neat little lesson to look back into, because yes, the bright and flashy colors can be a little bit off-putting, but honestly, if anything, it just grabs the attention more for the reader and really enthralls you to want to know more, to see what's going on, to see what is causing these colors to pop out so readily. And frankly, it adds that very unique style. And honestly, I am still a major fan of like any older style. If you've seen some of my past reviews on this channel, you will know I definitely have an appreciation for the old artwork. Some great examples being, of course, Batman Nightfall Part 1, as well as John Carter, Warlord of Mars. Both great examples of old artwork still standing the test of time today. But that's not to say that Under the Red Hood doesn't do well either. With the more digital artwork that it's going for here, it still manages to have that very nice, rough aesthetic that you see in a lot of modern Batman comics nowadays. And frankly, it really does stand the test of time in that sense. It is amazingly well drawn and colored. All of it is amazing, just to put that out the way. Now, let's keep moving, shall we? So, I'm not going to lie to you guys. I had been recommended to read more about Red Hood and Jason Todd as a character for a long time now, and being able to finally see what they were talking about after diving into these comics, it was definitely an eye-opener, to say the least. And again, now this has inspired me with some great ideas for either some future character spotlights I might be doing, or of course another book versus movie video, which, under the Red Hood, that would be a juggernaut to tackle. Though if I also include Death in the Family, that is a whole other thing, but then again, I think I might just stick with Under the Red Hood in this particular case. It would definitely be good to do another book versus movie video because it has been a while, but seeing the stark contrast between the book versus the movie, or some of the details that were glossed over from the comic to the movie, it definitely puts a unique perspective there. Because while I still love the movie and always will, the comic paints a much broader picture that, when looking back on it, you see how all of this could have been added onto and had bettered the movie, in my personal opinion. But again, I still would say that I'm fairly new to Batman, even though I have read quite a few of his comics by this point. I mean, if you've seen the channel history, you would know. Even so, diving into the Batman mythos alone, I know, would definitely take quite a while and would definitely be quite the adventure, all things considered. I am not new to Batman by this point. Am I new to discovering more about the Bat family? Absolutely. Would I want to? Well, give me some time. I'm at some good recommendations, and absolutely. And while I might not be the greatest Batman fan, I will say I do have an appreciation for what he is, as well as the characters and cast that he keeps around him at all times. I will say that I do have that much appreciation for him. Who knows? Maybe we'll probably do a video on him someday. But we shall wait and see. Now, with that all taken out of the way, let's move on to the final scores. Now, I think this would be remotely obvious, judging by the praises I've been heaping on both of these books, but Death in the Family, solid 10 out of 10. And Under the Red Hood, also solid 10 out of 10. For great artwork, great storytelling, and more importantly, being able to fully introduce me more to the character of Jason Todd, the Red Hood. Hence the title of this video, the Jason Todd Spotlight. Now, for those of you who have stuck around to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. It really means a lot to me that you have stuck around to the end, listening to my crazy little ramblings about certain comics or series, but I will say this much. If you guys have any recommendations for certain characters or certain comics that you would want me to review for the future, please feel free to let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts and recommendations, and while I might be busy tackling my own collection, your recommendations are always appreciated, and needless to say, I will always be adding them to my future reads list. And if you guys want to see some of the other comics I have covered on this channel, please feel free to check out the playlist at the end of the video. Or if you want to see some of the other random books that I have covered as well, I will leave a link to that playlist at the end of the video. Once again, thank you all so much for listening. This is Rambling Collector, signing off for now, and I will see you all in the next video. Have a great day, fellow readers.